Good evening, everyone. We're going to call to order the October 27th, 2014 City Council meeting. And tonight, we are privileged to have three individuals that are going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. We've got Ben Zwollen, Andrew Zwollen, and Leah Zwollen. They're going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then we're going to ask you guys a few questions, and then we're going to say something that's really fun about you guys, okay? Why don't you guys stand up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Wonderful. May be seated, except for our three guests, Ben and Andrew and Leah. How are you all? Good. Wonderful. Hey, step a little bit that way and kind of talk into that microphone for me. All right, so Ben, why don't you tell us a little about yourself? How old are you and what grade are you in? I'm 9 years old and I am in 4th grade.
You're in 4th grade, and where do you go to school?
Coyote Ridge Elementary.
What was the name again?
Coyote Ridge Elementary.
Coyote Ridge? Coyote Ridge Elementary. Now that doesn't sound like a school here in Stillwater. Where is that?
Fort Collins, Colorado.
Fort Collins, Colorado. And so, is there someone up here that you know really well? Nana's up here? and so, Counselor Pat Darlington, is that Nana?
This is Nana.
Hello, Nana.
My official name.
Your official name. I can't wait to use that
Can we
later.
start calling you that?
Sure, we're going to have my sign changed too.
We'll change it to Counselor Nana. Wonderful. And so, Ben, what do you like to do?
Well, in the summer, I'm on the swim team. I sometimes play basketball. And at my school, we play football.
Wonderful. What's your favorite subject?
Science.
Science is your favorite subject. That's wonderful. Very cool. All right, Andrew. How are you, buddy?
Good.
Cool. How old are you and what grade are you in?
I'm 7 and I'm in 1st grade.
You're in 1st grade. What school do you go to?
Coyote Ridge.
Coyote Ridge Elementary. Is that still in Fort Collins, Colorado?
Yeah.
Wonderful. And what do you like to do at school?
PE.
PE? It's my kind of guy right there.
Yep.
All right. What do you like to do when you're not at school?
Play on my iPod.
Play on your iPod. Oh, it's still my kind of guy. That's doing pretty good. And so is this your Nana also?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. That's great. You did a wonderful job. And Leah, how are you?
Good.
How old are you, Leah?
5.
You're 5. One day, will you stop being so shy? You will? Okay, that's good. What do you like to do, Leah?
I like to jump on the trampoline.
You like to jump on the trampoline? That's a lot of fun. Now, are you in kindergarten? You are. Now, do you do all sorts of hard math like calculus in kindergarten?
No.
No, you don't? What's your favorite thing to do in kindergarten?
I like to go to the library.
You like to go to the library. Now, that sounds like Nana right there.
Yep.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you guys very much for coming and lead us in the play. Mr. Blankenship, yes?
Can you ask them if they have a favorite college team?
I do not. Do you want me to?
You ask them.
Oh, okay. What is your all's favorite college football team?
Well, we're not much of a football family,
Okay.
but I'm going to say CSU Rams.
Wait, Colorado State Rams? I don't think they have a football team anymore. Oh, 7-1 this year. They've got a football
Pat, we need to work
team.
on that.
So,
We'll work on
okay.
that.
Well, they're in Fort Collins. It's going to happen. That's okay. You root for that home team. Thank you guys very much for sharing with us and leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm going to run down there. And Leah, guess what? I've got candy for you.
Ooh.
Yay.
That's funny.
Hey, Nana, come here.
Do you have candy for me too?
Could you see she hesitated?
There's another one out there. You want to get her in here too? Yeah.
Taking family photos. She said she's one.
Once in.
Oh, she wants it. No, I thought she was telling us her age. They're photogenic. Yay. Good job.
You're welcome.
Oh.
Okay, we're going to take us into our general orders on our agenda, and our first item is stormwater infrastructure and asset management. Mr. Wittenberg, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, sir?
Doing great.
Well, good evening. Cody Wittenberg, Stormwater Management. And tonight we get to have a conversation just about stormwater in our fair city and to talk about a little bit about what's happened in the last couple of years and also gain some insight into where we're going in the future. So first up, you may recall, some of you may recall, in 2011 at a study session over stormwater, we discussed some of the basics, and the directives at that time given to staff were to continue to operate with the existing program and also to ensure that our existing fee structure that was applied to the city of Stillwater was done equitably and was applied to all parcels appropriately. So I'm happy to report at this time we've completed that step. And tonight we'll be talking about just the future movements that we have. We'll do a review of the programs that we have existing, and we'll also talk about existing program needs. So for a recap, stormwater programs, I typically divide this into 5 sections for stormwater management. You start at the top, the green circle there that you see, and move clockwise. We have our federal and state regulatory programs, which includes our water quality programs and FEMA programs. And you also have to consider our local regulation. That's our local codes and ordinances that apply to development, and also our Board of Drainage Appeals. And we also offer technical guidance to ensure whenever citizens have concerns with drainage or stormwater quality, they have a resource that they can go to. And then we maintain funding through 3 primary areas, through grants, through the general fund, and then primarily through our stormwater utility. And then when you get into operations and maintenance, we look at watershed planning and our overall plans for urban drainage and capital improvement programs. And then we're always looking for the future. We have new regulations that come through pretty frequently, and we also have to consider TMDLs, or those types of programs that we may have to work through very soon. And of all these that you see here, probably the most expensive, of course, is the capital improvement program. This is the projects that you have for a new channel or for a new culvert system, those types of things. So before we really get into all the details of where we are right now, I wanted to offer a few fundamentals on stormwater. First of all, what is stormwater? Basically, through EPA definition, it's precipitation, as you might imagine, water from storms. But that's also, by definition, any other water that gets into our system. So if there is a facility that's irrigating and that excess runoff runs into our streets and pipes, at that time it is now our city responsibility to manage that as stormwater. And of course, we talk about the MS4. That is another EPA term, and it stands for the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System as an acronym. And that is all of the components of that system. So it's our streets, gutters, channels, anything that carries water from point A to point B. And of course, why do we care about stormwater? Well, 2 main reasons, of course: water quantity and water quality. So how much or how little there is. Fortunately and unfortunately, we've been in a drought in the last few years, so we haven't had to deal with a lot of major flooding issues recently. And then, of course, we also maintain water quality programs regularly. So next up, what is impervious surface? Impervious surface is any material that we put in through development or what have you that limits infiltration. So what we're talking about is our rooftops, our streets, our new parking lots, those types of things. If you look at the figure on your left, these slides come from EPA, and you can see that in a traditional natural ground cover, we have limited runoff, and as we proceed and develop communities and areas, then you have an increased amount of runoff that you have to work with to manage and maintain. So what is the moral of all this? The moral of the story is that as we increase impervious area, we generate more runoff, and frequently that includes more pollution and more energy that we have to deal with our existing system. So I wanted to take a moment this evening to apply these fundamentals to Stillwater and help give you a better understanding of how it applies to our community. Here in this figure, you see the Stillwater Creek watershed, and you can see the city of Stillwater. City limits here is this hashed line, and this dotted line that you see around this area, that is the Stillwater Creek watershed. So any precipitation that falls within that circular area is draining in and towards the creek. Now, we're responsible, of course, to manage the water that falls within the city of Stillwater city limits, and also the water that comes in and leaves our city. So when you pull that onto a closer scale, we've been able to map our localized watersheds. I'm sure you see several creeks here that you're very familiar with. And you can see the square mile drainage area that is connected to each of those. For example, you see Brush Creek's draining about 28 square miles. Granted, it's not all within the city of Stillwater, but we also have to consider the outside impacts of that area. And then, of course, right on top of those same watersheds, we also have to worry about flooding from time to time, and we have our FEMA regulations for floodplain. Here I have the red area is the FEMA regulatory floodway. You've heard that term recently. And then you also have the orange area, which is the 100-year floodplain, and then the yellow area is the 500-year floodplain. Of course, regulations apply to the floodway and the 100-year floodplain. So next up, I want to talk about how we fund these programs and fund the different avenues that we have to maintain through the utility fee structure specifically. So with that, I wanted to offer some details of that utility fee structure. It was created in 1997, and it provides funding to all of the programs that were discussed in the slide earlier. But the revenue that we generate from that funding source does not fully support all of our operation and maintenance costs at the very basic level. It's approximately 80%. The average revenue that we take in is about $285,000, and the lack of funding that we have is usually limiting the amount of capital projects that we can invest in and limiting the amount of responsiveness that we have to citizens. Frequently, we have citizens call and want to address a certain area of town, and typically my answer has to be that we can't afford it right now, but we'll put it on our books and we will proceed to look for funding sources in the future to provide that. So of course, we're also looking for grants frequently. Recently, you've approved a CDBG application that was a storm-related project and those types of things. And grants allow us to increase the value of our dollar in a sense. So what are our current charges with utility fee? Residential fees is $1 flat rate charged monthly. You may have seen that on your utility bills. And the commercial rate is applied based on the amount of impervious surface as identified earlier. So it's a range of $5 up to $55 with a cap at the $55 rate, depending on how large and how much development has occurred on your particular commercial site. So this ties right into asset management. Ultimately, earlier I defined the MS4, and all of those components are our stormwater assets that we have to maintain as a community. So one thing it's important to remember is that those assets are just like any other public system that we have to maintain. So whether we're talking about streets or water and wastewater systems, it is an infrastructure system in and of its own that we have to provide funding for. A typical concept for communities to develop and maintain these types of systems is a stormwater master plan. And that might be recommended for a city of our size, similar to the way we've managed streets through the Stillwater pavement management system, and then also how we've managed water and wastewater through the Water 2040 plan. Key points to take away at this slide really are that stormwater projects are equally expensive, just like other infrastructure projects. We have our stormwater system, and in many ways it is deteriorating in areas, and we have to address, again, those public concerns that come in from time to time. Water quality support in Stillwater is pretty limited to none, and general O&M requires large equipment. We have to buy large pieces of machinery to maintain our system, and the expenses that are associated with maintaining that after it's purchased are also quite expensive. Of course, we also have to fund unfunded mandates that have come over through time, and we are looking forward to potentially receiving more MS4 regulations in the future, which may require more funding. And then, of course, we're always looking at a general consensus to make sure we understand our remedies for long-term major programs. Better? Very good. So I wanted to give you a quick graphic that kind of demonstrated the overall components of stormwater management. And this is one of the first projects that I worked on when I moved to the city of Stillwater, was to go through and to identify and map our system, to map the assets that we're trying to maintain. And if you look at a graphic that brings this more into focus, as a good example, this larger building that you see here is actually the rooftop of the Walmart Supercenter out on West 6th Street. Here, this highway here is West 6th Street. And this is the Resident Inn by Marriott. Now, of course, our systems are a combination of public and private systems. Here you see that Walmart's roof drains are all connected to an underground pipe system. That's the orange pipes that you see there. But once it discharges into the right-of-way along 6th Street, it then becomes our domain to manage and maintain. So earlier I mentioned that capital projects were expensive, and I wanted to offer just a quick slide that demonstrated some of the recent projects we have been able to fund, usually through a mix of grant funding. 2007 was the channel that extends down south of the library from 12th to 14th Street. And we also funded a design with a combination of HMGP funding through FEMA for the Babcock Basin flood hazard design. And in 2013, we had a series of projects for drainage improvements and to repair some culverts that were collapsing or potentially going to collapse in the future. And then most recently, we funded some localized channel projects and some projects to address some drainage concerns that our citizens have brought to our attention. So what are the key points of this presentation? Basically, the key points are that stormwater management in the city of Stillwater is well organized, and we continue to seek cost-effective solutions and external funding through grants and cost-share programs, those types of things. However, our existing program funding, and even with grants that are contributed, our program overall and the funding for that program is not sustainable for long-term projects. And without funding, we're unable to meet all the needs for projects in our community and the needs of our citizens in a manner that's very quick. So the final slide for this presentation is talking about options and recommendations. Of course, this evening is a study session, and it's meant to really foster a conversation and to discuss these options. But here's some recommendations that we could consider. First of which is to fund a stormwater master plan. Approximately $800,000 is what it would probably cost a city of our size to have a comprehensive plan. It is expensive due to the modeling, those types of engineering calculations and costs that are associated with it. Another option would be to modify our existing fee structure and look at different proposals to increase our revenue through that system. And then I would also encourage the city of Stillwater to create and establish a criteria for reevaluating our system on a 3-year rotation, and to also consider a 10-year capital improvement program and a list of projects that's tied very closely to that master plan, to have a roadmap, so to speak, so we know what projects are going to be funded and what is of the most importance in a priority situation. And then finally, we have to look at potential ordinance changes that may come as a result of additional regulation. So with that, I will turn it over to you and provide any feedback or answer any questions you may have.
Wonderful. All right. Council.
It's a lot of information.
Absolutely.
And that scratched the surface. So that
Will you
did
go
it.
back? Will you put the options and recommendations on,
Yes.
please?
I have a question. You said residents pay $1
That is
a
correct.
month, and commercial pays $5.
Up to 55.
Up to 50.
Oh, up to 50, sorry, see, that's why I asked you. When it's a multifamily housing structure, how is that
That's a
charged?
very good question, and that is considered a commercial structure in the city of Stillwater. So no, not every unit is charged $1. It's actually applied under that commercial $5 to $55 rate, and that bill is sent to the owner of that facility.
So like the big apartments are capped at $55?
That is correct.
Even if each unit is obtaining its own utility bill.
It's still correct.
Right.
Seems a bit.
Again, going back to the, I'll let Cody answer, but it's not based on how many people as much as how much runoff you create. And so,
But I mean, in that case, we should be way undercharging people if it's based on how much runoff they're creating.
So residents theoretically might create less than a commercial property just because of the size. And
Yes, theoretically, that would be true.
anytime you build something new and you take dirt away and you put concrete down, I'm assuming that changes the plan or impacts the plan.
So typically what you're talking about there is a development project that would be coming in at some location. And we, of course, manage that through development services. We look at their stormwater development plan and we review their H&H study or hydrology and hydrologic study and ensure that they're not going to increase the rate of runoff based on the existing conditions as it moves forward. But that doesn't mean that they're not generating additional pollutants and generating additional energies associated with that runoff. So from that standpoint, the projects are maintained and managed, but then how do you develop a calculation to apply and collect an equitable and equivalent collection of fees? We do consider what is called an equivalent residential unit. And in Stillwater, that's set at 5,000 square feet. And so that was sort of the basis in 1997 when the structure was developed. That's where that basis came from. And I would be happy to discuss all of that and show you how we develop those calculations and fees if you would like that.
Are you comfortable that those are still the calculations we should be using?
So one option would be to review what other cities have done and to see how Stillwater's commercial fee structure compares to other cities in Oklahoma. Many cities probably have a value that is smaller than 5,000 square feet as their ERU. So as a function of that, properties would be increased in the amount of ERUs that they were generating runoff from. And in addition, a lot of cities do not have that cap at 55. So if you develop a square mile, you're going to be charged equitably without that cap at the high end.
Thank you.
That's certainly an option.
Cody, is that included in one of the recommendations that you've made?
So the option number 2 here under my recommendation would be to review utility fee structures. I would be happy to come back with you through another study session or even through a proposal to offer some recommendations and to really identify, very similar to the questions you were asking, really identify the specifics of our utility fee structure and some opportunities for changes.
Do you think it's, and that went off again, but do you think it's more important to look at our fees and get that correct before we start spending big money on figuring out capital projects for money we don't really have?
Let's say one option as a really good option would be to do 2 things simultaneously. The first would be to develop that master plan and fund it, because it may take 1 to 2 years for all of the engineering to come together for us to have a plan that is adopted. But at the same time, we'd want to be able to fund those projects that are tied to that plan very quickly. So if we were able to fund a master plan now, and then also look to redistribute our funding through our fee structure and modify that fee structure to increase revenue, we'd be able to have a couple of years while we're developing the plan to also increase our savings in our stormwater reserve fund and be able to apply that very quickly in a couple of years.
One of and I agree with Cody's answers completely, but it's going to be difficult to get the rates set. We'll never get them perfect, but to get them optimal until you have the master plan study. It's much like our cost of service study on water. It's like our pavement management system. Till you completely understand the situation and have a master plan that says, here's what it's going to cost the city year to year. Here's what capital's going to cost. That tells you what the cost is to the city. Then you develop a fee structure that matches that. So without that, you have a danger of charging too much or too little, as I understand. And I think the master plan would really help the council set appropriate fees over time. Is that a fair assessment, Cody?
I would agree with that to some degree. The key of the master plan really is to develop an overarching plan to ensure that there is a sustainability function of our overall infrastructure. Now, whether you were to implement all of the projects that may or may not be tied to that plan in 10 years or 100 years would be fully dependent on the amount of funding that you had available and your priorities at the time. So I would say that it could really go either way.
Yeah.
It would be a choice that you made.
Would a master plan be affected by any kind of new development, or would you take into consideration these are areas that should be developed at this time?
So that's a very good question. And as a function of any time you're developing an H&H study or a drainage plan for a site, you're considering that optimum full build-out condition. So let's assume that we're going to develop 80% of our watershed. We would take that into consideration when we're developing those list of projects and those controls through the modeling and ensure that that was considered for a future.
You said that your budget is about 250,000. Did I see that right? No.
The revenue that we generate.
The revenue
is
that
about
we generate.
285,000.
285,000, okay.
That's the dollar and the $55.
So that's the sum in 1 year, January through December, approximately. That's the amount of revenue that we bring in on the utility bills from both the residential structures, the $1 a month, and the commercial fees at whatever rate that is. So it's commercial and residential revenues together.
So I guess my second part, more a comment. How do you know it's 800,000? It just seems like, I mean, that's almost
It's a
three
very good
times.
question. So typically what I do for these types of cost analysis is recently I evaluated other cities in Oklahoma that have done a stormwater master plan and took their square area and divided that into the amount of money that they spent to create a ratio, and then factored that into our city, which is about 30 square miles. And it came up between $700,000 and $800,000. There are engineering firms that certainly charge a lot more for master plans, and there's certainly engineering firms that charge less. And a lot of that is dependent on what the scope of work that is tied to that master plan really is. But 800,000 is a fair assessment.
It's kind of pricey as master plans go, but I think the stormwater, the management, the amount of hydraulic and hydrology engineering that takes place is huge. I mean, it's extremely detailed engineering analysis, much more than goes into a lot of other types of master plans. So it's mostly that research and analysis and evaluation,
Absolutely.
modeling that's expensive. One of the, just not to interrupt questions, but one of the points related to that, and we've talked about this a little bit at the staff level, one of the advantages to the master plan is a big advantage to developers. And it goes back to what Councilor Noble was asking, is that if you want to have a master plan for that entire basin that was shown on the map that the city's adopted, that becomes the official hydraulic model that is official with the city. As it stands today, you come in to develop in the city, you have to go employ engineers to do a hydraulic analysis of a portion of the basin, and it gets very, very expensive and costly, and it's very difficult for us to evaluate that because of you have to all agree to what the base data was. And if we want to have a master plan, all developers would have that base data, which is a lot of the preliminary work, and so their cost to do a study for how are we going to deal with drainage on our particular development becomes an easier issue for them to address and easier for us to evaluate. And so it can make the development analysis a little easier and a little more easier to evaluate.
You have something, Pat?
No, that's just an interesting thought.
I have, so you're saving developers money.
No, what I'm saying is it gives us a better assurance that everybody's using the same baseline data. And
But
so,
they don't have to go out and hire someone, so you're saving developers money.
So let me touch on that for just a moment to make sure we're very clear.
which then your fees come back into development fees for.
So we could, yeah.
Let's assume we were developing a super center of some sort, okay? A master plan would not automatically waive the requirement for this company
No.
to do a H&H study. They would still be very much required to develop a hydrologic and hydraulic study, but that study would have to tie in to what the city of Stillwater has set as an overarching plan for our city's runoff. It does not in any way waive them of that requirement.
No.
Okay.
Do we require, and this may be a question for Paula, I don't know, but do we require developers to fix problems if they cause stormwater problems?
That's a good question. I would say that if it was found that a development did create a problem with stormwater, then yes, we would certainly discuss that with the owner and the engineer of record.
Because I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of this too much, but I don't understand stormwater to the, obviously like you do, but to me, I mean, if I build a single home, it's not really going to cause that much effect to what's happening. But if someone comes in and puts a 10-story student development or, you know, something like that, that's going to be a lot bigger impact. And so to me, it seems like this is more of a larger development issue than kind of a single family. It seems like something maybe we should look at putting a lot higher fees on larger developments, but maybe I'm really off base on that.
Well, so ultimately, the thing to remember is that when there's a commercial site that comes into Stillwater to develop a piece of land, they are held to a pretty strict standard by today's standards to ensure that they are managing and accounting for their changes in runoff that might be generated as a function of that project. We do have, of course, detention requirements and rate control requirements. We, of course, have floodplain regulations and general nuisance abatement type regulations that prevent those issues from happening or should prevent those issues from happening.
Okay.
Cody, you know that I love being proactive and having plans.
Absolutely.
And I, when I look at the recommendations that you had, were there four? 4 or 5?
Yeah, 4 or 5.
And the 800,000 did kind of take my breath away. Actually, yeah, 5. And ideally, if we had all the money in the world, we'd just start at the top and go down.
Absolutely.
Is there a way to mix and match them that, you know, if we had this much money, we could do this much? Or is there any way to make that useful?
Sure. I guess one option would be to kind of tie back to what Dan Galloway mentioned earlier, and that is to consider changing the fee structure first to gain revenue and then fund a master plan in the future. Another option to consider, which would take a little bit of research on my part to really get you some details on that, would be to review each area on a watershed basis. I showed a slide earlier of the 7 major watersheds, essentially, and you could consider doing a small watershed-based approach for a master plan, which would spread that cost over time. However, you might not achieve the actual end goal of a citywide master plan if you went that direction.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cody, I've got a decent list here, and it's going to go across the board.
Okay.
About 6 weeks ago, we had a rezoning application that included, let me phrase that, the property that was owned included both floodway and floodplain land.
Yes.
The rezoning application was specifically limited to the properties that were outside of the floodway.
That is correct.
We didn't really get into it that evening, but can you give us the 30-second definitional difference between floodway and floodplain? I have a point. I'm coming to it, but
So typically the floodplain, from a regulatory standpoint, is a kind of reserved, no development area, predominantly due to the amount of risk and the danger that is associated with that zone. If you can imagine that the creek is flooded, the area that you see moving water through, the area that's still running water with a current, would be that floodway. That's where those waters are still moving forward. And as the flood waters in the floodplain recede and go down, they're running along that center line or that corridor, which is the floodway. So I would say the difference is really a moving current along the center of that floodplain as opposed to the standing water that's in the floodplain.
okay. We specifically did not rezone a property that's in a floodway, and that led to some conversations, which led to my question to you a couple weeks ago about this potential of a master plan or a study of the overall drainage system for our city. why should we care about having a master plan? Or let me back up. Why should we care about a drainage system other than the federal government or state government tell us we have to? Give us the benefits of why we need to be proactive on this.
Ultimately, it ties back to citizen protection and protection of property and our infrastructure. In many cases, as you're probably well aware, city streets are serving a primary function for traffic, but a secondary function for stormwater conveyance. That is a function of that street in many locations. We also have culverts and systems and bridges that allow water to pass underneath systems. And we certainly want to make sure that the subsurface infrastructure tied to stormwater is in a good condition to ensure that that upper layer of infrastructure, such as roads and parking lots, is protected. Those are a couple of really good examples of why this is critically important.
Okay?
It's interesting that you'd never think about it until your house is washing down.
So your house is washing down, or you wonder why your road's disappearing.
Yes.
You've made a couple of statements concerning, well, we've had some conversation about fees and what do we charge now and what, some concepts about that. What is the purpose of us charging? What is the purpose of the fee? Is it to simply pay to collect enough to do the bare minimum? Is that how it was set?
I actually believe in 1997, based on, I was not here at that time, of course, but based on the conversations that I have had, the intent originally was to fund capital improvement programs. More specifically, I believe it was tied to the Duck Creek area, and over time, we've increased regulations. We've had unfunded mandates. So again, the fee was established in 1997. In 2005, Stillwater became a permitted, regulated entity for stormwater quality. Those programs, of course, required funding. FEMA and CRS, Community Rating System programs, of course, require funding as well. So the intent in 1997 for funding was project-driven. Over time, we've had additional regulations that required funding. I mean, a time period of 17 years has essentially passed. And
there have been no increases to the fees in the last 17 years?
that is correct.
17.
17 years. And is it through this system that that some properties are allowed to obtain flood insurance if need be? I mean,
So as a participating community in the National Flood Insurance Program, yes, we are eligible for our individuals in town to take on flood insurance for their properties if they see fit.
and it's only because we meet the requirements that we are eligible to be a participant in that program? Is
That's
that
a true statement, yes.
That's correct.
Okay. If this may be a chicken and the egg question. If money just fell out of the sky to do a master plan or a planning of the drainage system, would that plan, is that simply an engineering-based plan to tell us what water's flowing where, or would it also help create that list of projects and prioritization of the projects?
Both. It would certainly include prioritization and a list of projects. Now, the detailed engineering of each of those projects is typically not a part of
And
that.
that makes sense.
But the overall concept of locations and priorities and areas of concern are certainly included in that master plan.
Okay, now this is my chicken and the egg part. Could or should this type of plan also be equivalent to the cost of service study that we are starting for our water and wastewater? Would this type of study be the appropriate mechanism to help us determine what the purpose, what are our goals, and what should our fees be to accomplish the goals? Would this study be the right way, or is that a different?
I believe that is true to some degree. Ultimately, the goal of this plan is to create a general concept of what Stillwater's drainage system should look like.
It's more of an
It
engineering.
is an engineering-based study, yes. But at the same time, you're able to take the output of that study and then review the overall cost of what it's going to take to implement and maintain that study over time. And I think at that point, you're able to assess what sort of fees are really needed to maintain that O&M in the future.
I got a couple from you. What, and you may not know this, but no, it's okay. What percentage of Stillwater is in a floodplain?
I do not have that answer. I do believe we have about 2,000 policy holders, but there are many properties in the floodplain that do not have flood insurance.
Okay. Because, and let me just make sure I understand your statement, is that for them to be able to have the flood insurance, which is a federal government program, we have to meet federal government guidelines.
That is correct.
So, okay. So one of our main purposes for these plans is to make sure that our residents can be protected in the event of something, a flood.
Certainly a benefit.
Okay. And then my second question is, do we have a stormwater problem?
I think it would depend on who you ask and what area of town you're in, but there are certainly areas in town that were developed at a time when regulations for stormwater were not in existence. And so there are many areas in town that and within our city that we could address through some large-scale capital improvement projects, but they would be very costly.
Throw me a percentage of where our problem is, like 10% of our cities in a I mean, just, I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm just curious, just for my own
I'm really
thinking.
not sure I can answer that. There are certainly a number of issues in town that have been brought to my attention that I keep on a running list.
Okay.
However, there's no way that we're able to assess and address them right now. The goal for project assessment really is based on need and the number of individuals affected by that project. And we certainly, as you've seen in a previous slide, we've certainly implemented some projects to address some critical areas that have come up, but I don't think I can answer that, unfortunately.
Okay. I think, and I know we're just talking about it, but obviously, from my perspective, before I would ever consider spending $800,000 on a study, I would need to know what percentage of the city we're studying. I mean, I know you're saying it's only a portion that has the problem, and so for me, if it's only a portion, I mean, is it needed right at this second to do? And so I just think, and I definitely am on the proactive side with Pat, but I mean, are we being too proactive if there's not a...
I don't believe it's really a question of too proactive. The purpose of this master plan is not necessarily to be the projects that you're implying of these areas have critical projects. We can certainly continue to do that on an as-needed basis as they come through and assess them and prioritize them as they come through the various chains of command that we receive that information. What a stormwater master plan is ultimately doing is it's providing us a sustainable program for the long term. So we understand how all of the pieces of the puzzle, how all these projects that are through private development or through a city initiative are coming together to ensure that that overall system is compliant and also cohesive.
What kind of compounds that? It's a very good question, you know. But the complex part in stormwater is, let's say it is 10% of the city has stormwater problems. What you need to know to manage those problems is how does activities on the ground in the other 90% of the city impact those problems. And so you have to understand 100% of the surface and what it does related to the problems. And that's why it's so expensive. Partly. I mean, you have to understand the entirety to understand the impact on the problem.
Could you put you had the options or not recommendations, but I think you said options. You had 5 on a list. What was the recommendations? Was the word used? The last one you have is a proposed ordinance changes. Is that just a reminder to us that things change, or are there things coming forward in a timely manner that you know of?
So that is there to remind you that we will be discussing things in the future very soon, most likely. As you may recall, our MS4 permit is a 5-year permit. and it was existing from 2005 to 2010. Now, currently, we of course are several years past that time frame for that 5 years, and EPA and the Department of Environmental Quality are discussing what that new 5-year permitting cycle is going to entail. But it is most assuredly a good chance that there would be some additional requirements that can be placed on our city as a function of that new permit language once that is distributed.
So you don't know of a very specific thing that's coming right now?
I do not. I just know that it is.
I appreciate the warning.
Something's coming.
It
We
could
just
be
don't know
coming.
what it
I
is.
just didn't know there was something already on the move.
And so a master plan would not be able to predict what the EPA may change,
That is correct. It's basically two separate functions of that.
but still costly when the EPA makes new regulations,
Absolutely.
but no way to predict it. So that's
No.
something that we
Unfortunately,
just
it is
have to
difficult.
deal with, and every city has to deal with. A master plan doesn't solve that.
That is correct.
It's probably, we don't know for sure, but it's very likely that future regulations, in order to meet them, we're going to have the information that a master plan provides.
That is
So
correct.
it's not the plan itself, it's the tool that it provides to meet the regulations, and we don't know what they are yet.
I agree with that.
Sorry, I'm going to go back one more time. So, Dan, what you're saying is that the information that it provides, I understand that, but there's no way to provide all of the information because we're not built. It's going to predict that we build to 80%, but wouldn't it make a difference depending on what is built and how do we, I mean, we can say, yes, it's going to be commercial, but I just, things
You kind of
change.
confused me. Would you say that again?
Yeah.
You lost me.
Okay, so we talked about a master plan might predict that we build out 80% in an area, is what you,
As an
your
option,
example.
yes. Just for discussion, yes.
Wouldn't it matter what we built as to how it affects the plan?
I would say that
If it's a residential area, it might affect it differently than if it's a commercial area. If it's zoned commercial and we just, we plan like that, but sometimes zoning changes. And how long does the master plan predict for something? 10 years?
Well, it could
20?
be set for many years to come. Our existing system is going to essentially be our system, and if we have a plan for future components of that system, then ultimately that could be as long as that plan is adopted. Theoretically, tying back to your first point, I would say that rainfall and precipitation is not really discriminatory into the type of land use. Ultimately, whether that is a shopping mall or a residential neighborhood, ultimately the amount of impervious surface that we place in those areas and the types of conveyance systems, we dictate to water how we're going to manage it. But a master plan is still useful regardless of the specific types of land use that are involved. Anything else?
Any other questions?
I guess I've got one more, because that last answer confused me a little bit. It seems to me that the first thing in the master plan that it is doing a sophisticated analysis of what's happening to water in our watershed today.
That is correct.
Has nothing to do with the plan for development. Then it's that data that you use to assess, okay, there's going to be an 80 development project here, 80 acres, whether it's residential or commercial. We then calculate that impact based on this new precise data we have.
That is correct.
So it's not a plan to plan where the developments go and it's not to guess where the development's going. It's a tool to evaluate the plans as they develop.
Yes, and the impacts of those future developments,
okay.
absolutely. Earlier, I showed a slide, of course, that had lots of various features that were in our system, the different components of our MS4 Atlas. And ultimately, a master plan helps us to evaluate the timing and the types of flows that are going through those systems. The traditional standard is a 100-year storm. We're evaluating at that 100-year interval. And so I do believe that, tying into what he said and mirroring what you also said, is we're not just looking at future development. We're also not just looking at the existing system. We're trying to create a plan for a sustainable future with stormwater management by first addressing our existing system and then also trying to understand how future development will impact that.
Tell you, you just raised another question, not so much another question, but it goes back into my statement earlier on fees. And none of us up here or you were here in 97 when this fee would have been put into effect. Your statement of it, I said up here, Marcy.
Come on up, Marcy. No.
But it's, you said it, runoff doesn't care if it's residential or commercial, it only cares if it's pervious or impervious. Functionally is what I heard you say. I'm a big fan of the whole concept of pay as you play, which is why I love our new trash carts. The bigger the trash can I have, the more I pay for it. The smaller the trash can, the less I pay. Does it make more sense to structure a stormwater fee based on pervious versus impervious rather than residential versus commercial? Is that even possible to determine?
So our commercial fee is based on pervious versus impervious.
Okay.
The residential is a flat rate because in most cases, a residential area is so small that it's actually more work to go in and calculate detailed the amount of impervious area that they have. Usually just create a flat rate.
Okay. But it's based on some assumptions for our area. You had some initials a
So
little bit ago.
most commonly how a city identifies what that area is going to be is they take an average, they select 10, randomly select 10 residential properties, evaluate the amount of impervious surface on those, and come up with an average.
Is this earlier when you said 5,000 square feet?
Correct. So we are assuming in the city of Stillwater.
Seems like an awfully large number.
It is larger than most cities. That is a true statement.
Of course, there's extremes in all cases. I mean, you can find, there's some residential in our city that maybe are 5 or 6 acre estates, and they have huge areas of paved area for all kinds of purposes, and they're probably creating 10 times as much runoff as another residential property. We don't allow for that, because it's all residential regardless of size of the lot.
That is correct.
So there's always going to be some exceptions.
Have we ever had a plan?
Not to my knowledge.
I would really like to see some research on how other cities charge and the measurements that they use for the size. I think that certainly would help us, and not really a question because I know the answer to this, but I'm assuming that drought, and you were talking about that at the beginning, certainly plays a role in how it affects us and how water affects us.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Probably, and I think that's really interesting. We need to look at that. We'll probably need to distinguish the cities, which ones are under the same regulations that we are versus the smaller ones that have different regulations and they have less to accomplish. But we can compare both. And I think you go back into earlier than ours, back even into the 80s and 90s as this developed. I think a lot of cities, everybody was guessing at setting rates. Some cities, let's charge 2, some let's charge 3, some were 1, some were 75 cents. It's all over the place. And we knew more regulations were coming, but no city knew exactly what they were. So it's been a developing system in all cities. We're not the only ones that have been 17 years without adjustment, and we're not the only ones who can't really tell you where that dollar came from.
The one note I would add to that is that many cities, we were probably the first, or one of the first, if not the first in Oklahoma to have a stormwater utility fee. And our driving force was project-based. The follow-up from that is that other cities, many of which developed the stormwater fees was in response to federal regulation. So they had a different driving factor for the reasons they were trying to develop funding mechanisms. However, in Stillwater, once the federal regulations were put into place, we use an existing funding mechanism to fund those programs.
So we're using money in a different way than was originally planned.
It's all for stormwater, but yes, project-oriented versus
Right.
program regulation-oriented. That's a fair statement.
I would also like to see in a study, before I make a decision, I certainly want to see this information. Also, I would like to see how many cities have a master plan.
Sure. I can certainly provide that to you.
Any other? Are we
Other
doing?
questions?
Oh, are we doing what we'd like to see? I'd like to see the percentage of the floodplain people. I think that's a pretty big impact, and so I think that's important. And then, I mean, you can't predict the ordinances, but that's definitely something that caught my eye too. So,
So for clarification, you would like percentage of floodplain
Just-
area and overview in the city?
yeah, just something, because it seems like that would, in my, obviously working in insurance, that's a driving factor for me of, I understand the disaster and things like that, and so I think that's a driving force for me of, I definitely want those residents to be protected, and so, but I would like to know how many we're protecting in the area, so.
In addition to that, I would just add that stormwater master plan flooding issues don't only occur in a FEMA regulatory floodplain, of course.
They don't follow the rules.
So
that.
we have certainly drainage issues and drainage concerns outside of that area, but I'll be happy to get that information to you.
It's kind of like the deer crossing, don't just cross where the sign is.
That's right. They cross where they want to cross. That's true. All right. Thank you very much.
Good information.
Thanks, Cody.
Thank you.
It's exciting to hear somebody is so excited about something that none of us see most of the time.
I feel
Thank you.
educated.
Okay. Next on our agenda is a topic entitled Community Enhancement Projects. And anyway, we want to kind of.
See you, Dan.
I'm ready. You have something for us? Okay. Let's hear it.
Just to give you a little background on this, and it wasn't exactly, didn't know the best term to put on the agenda to describe this. And I apologize for being back up here. Mr. McClenny was going to do this evening, and Mr. Blankenship's here. Unfortunately, Mr. McClenny had fever well in excess of 100 degrees today and was home ill, so I said, we'll cover it. But basically, what we're talking about this evening, this council and previous councils, all of us, we talk from time to time, whenever we have visioning sessions or we're talking about city planning, where we're going, repeatedly we hear, when are we going to make it look nicer when you drive into Stillwater? When are the entryways going to look better? When are all the medians, the islands going to look better? And then sometimes we get to looking around and we forget, we're so used to driving past certain things all the time and not truly looking. When we stop and look and say, oh, that's ugly. Why do we let those things happen? And so we've all been talking about it a long time, and we've started putting some programs together. We really want to address how our city feels to visitors. We want to attract people and make people feel welcome in our community. And we want them to drive in and say, wow, this feels good and looks good. And so there's a lot of areas that come up, and we're just going to talk about a couple this evening, things that we're working on. Mr. McClenny left me some pictures here. Let's see. Now, I don't believe these are not actual Stillwater pictures. These are from other cities. But the point is, you can have an intersection that over time begins to look like this. The signs aren't maintained. There's no landscaping. It's all hard surface. It looks rather dirty. Others that aren't paved become simply a maintenance headache. We just cut the weeds. And you probably can think of some where they maybe don't look that bad, but it happens. Or an island grows up. Again, I hope we haven't done that bad, but we have some where there's nothing in the island other than some growth that we cut. It might be nicer if they look more like this. Now, if we could have intersections with this kind of landscaping or medians or at intersections where we have signs and there's some space around them rather than chopping a lot of weeds out all the time, it might be nicer to have an attractive look. Medians, such as the one, we have medians coming into Stillwater, particularly on the west side. Now it's strictly grass. And it's nicely mowed grass, and it's nice, but there are options. It feels different to drive into a community when you see this one median versus weeds or grass in the median. And those are just pictures to say that's what we're talking about in Stillwater. We have several medians on entryways into our city. Of course, we have right-of-way on the sides of all of them. Several of our intersections have some islands. Some of them have some open space, some don't. We've got some large islands, such as the one at Washington and 6th Street, big triangle area. Currently, there's a few trees in it. There's a sign. We keep it mowed. We've made some real progress with the planning areas at intersections downtown. Downtown is much more attractive at the intersections today than in the past. So what we're in the process of doing, Mr. McClenny's working on this, we're trying to put together, identify all of the median areas and all of the islands and areas and intersection open areas that we have on all of our main entryways to Stillwater. And we're going to send out a request for proposals to landscaping companies and do it on a piece by piece so we can pick and choose. If we can afford to do the whole thing, we'll come to you with some options on that and show you what kind of proposals we get. I think to do this and make certain that it's a long-lasting thing, we'll want to bid these. We have several landscaping companies in the area that do this kind of work. Not only would we look at them putting in the landscaping, but then look at potential contracts for them to maintain them on an annual basis. Might be more cost-effective than trying to do it internally. So that's one thing that we're looking at. One of the other things that's come to our attention, and the mayor's mentioned it a few times, again, we drive past all the time, but you don't stop and look. And I think, I think we're all guilty in our own hometown. We drive the same streets every day. We're more focused on traffic and where we're going instead of focusing on what we see to the sides. But when you go visit some other town and you drive into town, you focus on what does this town look like? What kind of a town am I coming into? You look at the sides, you look at the weeds, you look at the rusty post or whatever, and you think, oh, this is not an attractive town. Or you see the others. So, we need to stop and look real hard ourselves sometimes. And because that's what our visitors do. We have thousands of street signs, speed limit signs, no parking signs, street corner signs, thousands of signposts in town. Many of them are 30, 40, 50 years old, brown steel, been painted several times, they're rusty and they're bent. When you stop and start looking at those, they're not very attractive. The newer posts that we put in are square material. They're more rigid, they're more resistant to bending, they're more resistant to rusting, and they have a much more attractive appearance. Now I don't think we can afford to go change them all in 1 year. We have an estimate of a couple $100,000 to change all the old rusty poles at one time. But we are working with our street department to develop a true signpost maintenance and replacement program. So we are going to start replacing the rusted and damaged signposts on all of our main arterials through town this first year. And we'll have a plan to inventory all of our signpost condition and eventually keep them all on a maintenance program. It's the little things that add up. If you had your intersections more attractive, your signposts are fresh and new looking, it begins to have a different appeal. Another thing that we've, again, along the same lines, you drive along 6th Avenue or both highways through town. We have a lot of banner brackets. If you look really closely, there's street light poles with 2 brackets sticking out, and at the holiday season, we'll put Christmas banners on. And that's nice. The rest of the year, bare brackets aren't very attractive. We aren't utilizing those. We've got so much to potential to show about Stillwater. I think there's a potential to maybe work with OSU and do some joint projects to put Welcome to Stillwater, Home of OSU type of things on the banners some months of the year. Different seasons of the year, we can change out banners. We can invest in several sets of banners over time and always have that welcoming look. When you come into town, there's always banners up that say Welcome to Stillwater in some form, whether it's welcome for the holidays, welcome to OSU football season, whether it's welcome to the Arts Festival, to begin to put a welcome mat out a little better than we do today. So we're looking at possibilities on that. When we start looking at those brackets, I'm going to let Mr. Blankenship address another issue about electric poles. We have, most of those brackets are on street light poles or electric poles. And when you start looking into those are not new and fresh either. So I'm going to let him tell you what we're going to do about those poles. But I think it's time that we really step up and look at how can we truly make our town look like we all want it to look when visitors come to our community, that they feel welcome, that it's attractive, that it's clean. And I think if we start doing that, a little more effort on our main thoroughfares through town, then we can spread that to other areas. And maybe we can get neighborhood participation. But I think it's time that maybe we look at least the possibilities of stepping up and taking the lead on, let's do a little job of looking a little better on our main area. So that's some of the things we're looking at. I'm going to let Mr. Blankenship tell you what we're doing on some of the other polls, getting ready to do, and then we'll just open it up for general discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Dan Blankenship, Colorado State University. That's what they do on Monday Night Football, right? When they show the pictures of all the players, and some of them you can't even understand what they say. But, so I always wanted to do that.
What position?
I took the opportunity. What position left out? But anyway, let's see here. Okay, well, with that, I just wanted to let you guys know one of the programs that we're looking at is a program to repaint some of our streetlight poles. We actually have a large variety of streetlight poles in the city of Stillwater, and we recently took an inventory and kind of an assessment on all of our major roadways. So if I can maybe show my pictures. Thanks, Blake. That's actually a concrete streetlight pole. That's located on South Perkins Road, south of 6th Avenue. And that particular corridor, south of 6th Avenue, almost all of the streetlight poles are concrete poles and actually have weathered really well and are in pretty good condition. That's the only location in town that we have those particular poles.
Mr. Blankenship, real fast.
Yes, sir.
On the street lights, and it's one of those, I know that I oftentimes will use the incorrect term. Street lights mean the illumination
Yeah.
over our street, not
Correct.
traffic signals.
Yeah, there's a definite distinction between a street light and a traffic signal, yeah. Hopefully we don't have people stopping for street light.
No, but I mean, just using the phrase street light.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's a good, and there are a lot of people that use the term street light or, signal light for traffic signals. So, yes.
So-
Now, what I'm talking about is the things that light up the street so you can see where you're at or where
And
you're going.
those fall under the utility authority's purview, not transportation?
No, they are maintained and by the Stillwater Electric Utility.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. Yep. So if anybody has a street light that goes out and they put in a SNAP request or something, we actually have a street light crew, two-person crew that go out and repair those, and actually we'll go out and do some surveys, and we try and get ahead of that game. But
I do like the new LED lights that are being.
and
put
we
in.
are in the process of doing some testing with some LED lights, and there's a couple on Western Road, and then there's a couple on, I think, Marine Drive, and maybe there's 3 on Marine Drive, and it's just absolutely amazing how much more light that those units put out and use considerably less electricity. But moving on, that's a concrete pole. Further up Perkins Road, this is in the industrial area north of Lakeview, and these are actually fiberglass poles. These were installed many years ago, and I'm like Mr. Galloway. I guess I just and maybe a lot of people will drive. I've driven this road 1,000 times, and it wasn't until we started talking about streetlight pole maintenance that I started looking. And I thought, holy mackerel, there are a lot of poles out there. But these are fiberglass poles. They're in relatively good condition. Not something that we're looking at finishing at this time. These are a little bit harder to see, but these are galvanized steel poles, and this is a duck. So basically from, I think, about Boomer on down to 6th Street, it's a one-piece pole, and it is, they're galvanized. They're actually in really good condition, and so we're not looking at these types of poles to need any type of refinishing at this point in time. The type of pole that we're talking about is this pole right here, and this one actually does have a banner on it. But this is a steel pole. They're located up and down 6th Avenue from probably Western to the Western Road to the eastern city limits. There's actually also 3 of these down at the intersection of 177 and Boomer Road. Main Street, all the way up from 6th Avenue to about halfway between McElroy and Lakeview, where it becomes Boomer. And so we're looking at about 128 of these types of poles. And just to give you a little close-up of what we're really experiencing, that if you really took a close look, you can see that we do have quite a bit of deterioration going on, and so that the poles do need to be refinished. We've done some investigation, and we're looking at probably in the neighborhood of about $600 a piece to refinish these poles. 128 poles, that'd be about $77,000. So I'm thinking all in, we're probably, when it's said and done, we're probably a safe estimate somewhere between $90,000 and $100,000 to do this work. Our plan is to put together a bid package, solicit for bids, and see what kind of bids we get, come back and let you know what kind of bids we receive, and then talk to you about funding. We don't have it budgeted in our operating budget, but we talk to you about what kind of bids we get and what we might do about funding this work.
And that same thing kind of holds true. We didn't, the median beautification project, the banner project, some of those other things, again, to improve the attractiveness of our community. We didn't budget those this year. Revenues are doing pretty well this year. Well, I'd like to look at these and get some more cost estimates for all these components, and what you could expect is when we come back, I'd probably ask for some supplementary budget amendments to put a little bit of money into how we look to our visitors. I think it's just, a few years ago things were so financially tight we stopped looking at those things and looked at the necessities, and we still look hard at the necessities, but if we can find some resources to apply to this, I think it would pay major returns in not only welcoming to our visitors, but quality of life for our residents, to have a little more pride in what we see. Again, it's not, I don't make those comments to be critical of what we've got. It's just that we've kind of, again, we've been focusing on where we're going instead of what it looks like. And we need to focus a little bit about what it looks like.
All right. Councilors, have any questions, comments?
I do have a question for Mr. Blankenship. On the steel poles that you showed us, are those structurally sound? And it's just a cosmetic thing?
Yes,
or
it's just it's a matter of going in and possibly sandblasting or removing the existing finish in some areas where we might have some what appears to be rusting, and we would put some treatment on those. But at least from our visual inspection, we didn't see any that we felt were structurally deficient. Of course, when we take them down or we do the work to prepare them, if we do find some, then we will replace those.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm all for beautification, and I think that I don't know if these are the only projects we're talking about tonight, but since master plan is on my mind, I certainly would like to see a master plan for beautification. It's important to our city. There's a lot of things I like that we're starting here, but I certainly think there are more things that we could do to make all parts of the city more attractive, and I would love to even hear citizen input.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt on that.
Yep, absolutely. Engagement of other entities, even in, I don't know, when people can feel ownership on their own corner or their own intersection, allowing them the avenue, if you use a road analogy, to be engaged in it is really a helpful thing. I had the opportunity, Mr. Galloway, just a couple of weeks ago to drive to visit a friend in Capel, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember what cities I drove through or what suburbs to get to Capel, but it almost took my breath away when I drove into Capel, because all of a sudden the medians, they didn't have landscaping, but they had the brick centers, and they had the brick crosswalks and the brick sidewalks. They had gorgeous signage. Hospital this way,
A good
Civic
wayfinding
Center
system.
here. All the light poles were gorgeous, and it was so dramatic driving into the city.
The signage is one of the things that is another thing I didn't mention. We don't have a plan, specific plan on that yet. We've had some ideas thrown out in the branding process about wayfinding signs. We've had some wayfinding signs suggested in the Puma plan. But again, that's one of those components of our beautification master plan, if you will, that I think we really need to address. I would hopefully developing a little excitement, I think, to just identify these first steps and get some things in progress. But again, continue to get public input and work on the master plan is a great idea. But I think some of the things that we see need some attention right away. I'd like to get those started, so we'll come back with some more detailed information on these.
I tell you what, there's some different concepts that obviously apply to different things, and I think the things that have been brought up tonight definitely have an amazingly positive impact, kind of like Nana's story a minute ago, of when she drove into a town that either you hadn't been or hadn't been in a while, the impact that you had when you got there. Mm-hmm. Definitely that. Well, that is extremely important. Well, other projects might not have that impact from a visitor standpoint, but can have an impact from a citizen standpoint. And you guys have probably heard me say it so many times, we have to sometimes leave our town to get a good perspective about our town. Mm-hmm. And so other things that we can be doing, and tonight I don't necessarily want to start creating laundry lists, but I do want us to kind of talk some concepts of what we'd like. Tell you one thing, and Pat kind of alluded to this, is what can people do in their own neighborhood, their own block. Well, I'm going to make a suggestion to everyone up here. I would ask that you guys do a Google search for a website called Tactical Urbanism. And it's a concept out there that ought to make every deep-seated, it's going to take the government to make it better kind of person, it ought to make them start shaking in their boots. Because the concept of tactical urbanism is people doing things for themselves to make their community better, not sitting and waiting for the government to do it for them. It is a spectacular concept, and some of the things that it promotes may not work in Stillwater. It may be something that some of these concepts only work in a true, deep urban type environment. But I think if we can learn from it, and we can learn about neighborhoods that can start working together to beautify their neighborhood, or they take control of the medians in their neighborhood. They may be city-owned, or it may be a park that is a city-owned park, but neighbors banding together to make improvements to their areas, whether it is painting the handrails along a walking bridge, or it's taking care of those medians out front, the sidewalks within and outside of their neighborhood. There's a concept called guerrilla gardening that just fascinates me, but that's a little teaser for people to go look. There's another idea that it promotes called chair bombing. Another idea, taking the streets back. And it's an idea of that on every Sunday afternoon, certain streets are no longer, cars are not allowed on streets that day to promote community engagement and involvement and utilization of that area. The painting of intersections that reflect the neighborhood. Just unbelievably fun ideas where citizens can get involved and do something to beautify, to improve, and you don't have to wait on the government to do it for you. How do we create the type of community where the citizens are wanting to make the community better, wanting to make the community more beautiful, making it a more livable community through many different ways? That's what the tactical urbanism mindset really is, and I absolutely love it. Now, not everything in that book would be deemed legal in the city of Stillwater, so it's not a carte blanche statement for people to just go to town. But there are a lot of great ideas. I think they're on Tactical Urbanism 4, their fourth book that they've put out. So there are a lot of great things we can do, both as from a city councilor, from a government standpoint, and some things it's got to be the government to do. It just bottom line does. But there are a lot of things that it doesn't. You don't have to wait on the government to do it. And we do need that citizen input on what some of those things might be.
It has to be both of us. I think, you'll all be totally dead sick of hearing me talk about Oak Creek. But that is exactly why we started that. There was nothing here that we knew that we wanted, and we said, we can't wait around until it gets built. We've got to do it. And because of the help that we got from the city staff and their excitement about our idea and the resources that they provided to us in just thinking and how to access, regulations and rules, made it possible. So it takes both of us. It takes city staff that are accessible and interested in what citizens want to do, and it takes citizens having the gumption to just say, we would like to do this.
Yeah, and
How do we do
possibly
it?
doing something different, or even if something has been thought of or talked about in the past, even if it didn't occur in the past, times change. People's attitudes change on things. And actually, on that point, I was actually approached before this meeting, and as an example of us wanting citizen input and citizen ideas, we actually had a citizen here tonight asking if she could speak, and I unfortunately had to say, I'm sorry, but the agenda doesn't have a spot tonight for direct citizen input. But I said, one of my goals is going to be that this is the start of the conversation that leads to meetings that we definitely are going to need citizen input. And she said, well, could you do me a favor? And my answer was, it depends. But what she asked, or what she said to me was that and I don't remember if she's the president of her homeowners association or she is a part of her homeowners association for her neighborhood. And she said that through conversations within her neighborhood and with other neighborhood groups, that they are very interested in opening the conversation again about a ban on parking in front yards. This is something that has been discussed before, actually went to a vote and was voted down about 10 to 12 years ago. But it's one of those, if citizens want to bring forward ideas, it means we have to have conversations about it. That is an example. Some can be big, some don't have to be big. I actually wrote down, as Mr. Galloway was talking, that we don't need, as we're having these conversations in beautification, we don't need to look at it as a standard of it's got to be a huge home run project. It doesn't have to be something that's going to end up on, the cover of USA Today as a project we've started. You win baseball games by hitting a whole bunch of singles. You really do. Or you win the World Series, just go ask the Giants.
Well, you just have to get up to bat.
You got to get up to bat, and so we get up there and we hit a bunch of singles. That gets us to a victory a whole lot quicker and a whole lot better than counting on the home run. Right, Tiger fan?
We were done early.
So, but it can be small things that help improve our city, and it can be those type of things that really multiple people can be engaged in, coming from different perspectives, so that it doesn't have to be everyone is in agreement and it's some huge project that requires it to be the only project that we do. We can have lots of smaller projects along with larger projects. So I really hope we can keep this conversation going.
Absolutely.
I want citizens to be giving us ideas and input. Some things the city's got to do, and I am very pleased that we are looking at and will actually accomplish putting a new frame around the picture, analogy I've used multiple times, and new street poles, painting the street poles, doing those things that whether you really recognize it or not will have a positive influence.
Those are singles.
Those are singles. Those are hitting the singles. And you start hitting enough singles and we have those things in place, and then we get to, paving or painting the crosswalks in, good ways that really make it stand out and make it unique. We've got projects going downtown with, we've talked for years. I remember one of the very first bid board meetings we had, we talked about having a downtown bid district sidewalk color, that when you walked into downtown, you knew you were in downtown because the sidewalk was different. Same kind of concept, just on a citywide basis. I could go on for hours, but I'm going to be quiet.
Well, I agree with you, and, one thing that a beautification project can do, and just starting to talk about this, and I did see the speaker talking, or the woman who came here tonight to talk about her neighborhood, and that's exciting that people want to help their neighborhood. She read the agenda, I'm assuming, and was able to, we want more people to be engaged and involved like that. And when we make these little singles, we build more than a beautiful city. We're going to build relationships, and mutually beneficial relationships that can go a long way, young and old. I can see young people in elementary school, students helping other kinds of groups do just little projects. There's no limit to what we could do for this that improves the city, but also improves the quality of life here.
I like that you brought up the example of the person who was here about her neighborhood, and I think that's an interesting thing that I've realized on being on the city council, is that the city is actually very accessible. We all are kind of jaded by our national politics and even our state politics. You think, what difference can I make? And at this level, a little neighborhood, one person in a little neighborhood can make a huge difference. And it's not that every neighborhood in Stillwater has to be exactly the same.
Oh.
And has to have, all the same restrictions. The flavor of the neighborhoods can come out, and, everybody gets to kind of put their heads together where they're living and also have different ideas. So that's another important reason for people to really speak up, because when it comes from here, it looks kind of all the same.
I agree.
It looks
And
spooky.
when it can be a neighborhood that is expressing their own common beliefs for that neighborhood, and by neighborhood, I don't necessarily mean what's the sign say out front, because we have a lot of neighborhoods that don't have signs out front, that are just a couple streets that are next to each other. That's a neighborhood. A neighborhood has nothing to do with what the address is. A neighborhood has everything to do with the people being there wanting to be neighbors. And what they can accomplish doing things their way can go a very long way.
Right.
And sometimes with a little bit of help from the city and from us, even more things can be accomplished in neighborhoods. So I'm very excited. I hope people will email us, try to get a hold of us, and talk to us about their ideas. And maybe we can have a bigger discussion where we have people come and give us their ideas.
Yep. Well, and Mr. Galloway, you were talking about some of those islands. We and I know at one point we moved that large Stillwater sign from 6th and Western, and that may not be with our new branding. Maybe we don't need that sign back up out on the west side of town. Maybe we need to be looking at a different sign welcoming people, a different concept of welcoming people on the west side of Stillwater instead of using the large sign that was there before. And maybe the same can be said on the east side also. I think these are ideas that we need to be exploring and looking into.
Agreed.
Any other comments on this agenda item?
Everybody read Tactical Urbanism.
It's good.
There were some
which one?
violent things in there.
Do you like guerrilla gardening? You like that picture? Anyway, all right.
Dress up like a
One more
gorilla.
thing I
Yes.
would like to say is, you know what, we have a bunch of experts who just happen to be at the greatest university, which just happens to be in Stillwater. We have great experts there, from the professors to the students, and wow, what a resource.
Very true.
I think Gina, when you said this creates relationships, doing these types of beautification projects, I mean, it is all about relationship.
Yes.
And as we think about beautifying the crosswalks or the medians or the light poles, thinking about beautifying the relationships that we have within the city, the OSU, Meridian, Career Tech, public schools. I mean, that is the beauty of a city, are those relationships.
Yes, absolutely. I think we all feel like that too.
Agreed. So hopefully where we'll be heading forward with this, if I could sum it up real fast, it'd be one of those: we need the engagement and we need that pride, people to have that pride that will make them want to get involved on the beginning level and also on a get your hands dirty level, meaning be involved and actually do, not just talk about.
Do we have someone in charge of this, or do we need to put someone?
Well, I tell you what, I think in about a month,
Yeah,
we're
I
having
think
the
it will come
reports
out.
from the committee reports from our subcommittees, and a lot of what we've talked about tonight ties in real tight.
It does,
Probably a
it
live
does.
group, yeah.
So
I think you'll be excited to hear it, Gina.
I'm sure I will.
Yeah.
wonderful. All right, okay, that's going to take us down to reports from officers and boards. Mr. Dorman,
Nothing to report, sir.
Galloway?
Nothing for this evening?
counselors, you got anything?
No, sir. The trick or treat thing
Downtown
is tomorrow
tomorrow
night. Downtown. I believe it starts at,
I don't know.
I think costume contest is at 6:30. The judging's at 6:30.
I'm joking.
Five.
I like Snickers.
5 to 8 is the overall event, and the costume contests, be there closer to 5 than 8 if you want to be part of the costume contest. I believe the contest is at 6:30.
Yeah.
So-
And everybody, watch when you're driving as we have trick-or-treaters out. I think the city recognizes trick-or-treating in the city on Friday.
On Halloween?
On Halloween. so
Halloween's Halloween in this
we need
town.
to-
Halloween's always Halloween here.
We need, and for the younger trick-or-treaters, elementary age, you can bring your trick-or-treaters in costume to Pioneer Stadium, free of charge, free admission. There's a trunk or treat in the breezeway of the stadium, and prizes, candy.
This is Friday night?
This is Friday
Anyone can
night.
dress up and do that?
I said elementary age.
Oh, elementary. Maybe I dress as an elementary child. That's my costume.
And then we're going to have a parade around the track at some point during the game. And I know Blake is probably saying, Gina, I know he's listening. Blake's in charge of all of the television for the game. So we are going to do that, though. So it's a very safe alternative for people to bring their kids out and to have, to be able to enjoy the Pioneers beating Enid and having your trick-or-treat all at once. So we hope to see everybody there.
Wonderful. All right, and then, you have something?
Oh, I just wanted to thank you. Oh, is this a place to thank?
Sure.
Oh, I wanted to thank you for how kind you were to my grandkids.
Oh,
And I have
they were
always-
wonderful.
I've always been impressed with how nicely you talk to the kids.
Well, thank you.
Oh, we're thanking John. I'd also like to thank you for your participation in the homecoming parade. I think you did a great job. You represented us very well. And you were
you're
one of the
welcome.
best waivers, if I have to say.
Well, I tell you what, you have to practice the princess wave.
I would say T. Boone did push-ups during the parade, so he kind of one-upped you a little bit, but
Hey, that's fair.
the waving.
Waving, you got to practice it. So my wife and I practiced the princess wave before the parade. So, but thank you. It's I love talking with the kids, and I think it's because I can connect really well.
You do.
Same wavelength, same. So
You like PE, we all know that.
we all like PE. Okay, thank you very much. And then who has radio tomorrow? I forgot
I
to
do.
look it up. You've got radio tomorrow with Bill Van Nuys on KSPI at 8:15, 780 a.m. And then I have radio Wednesday morning from 7 to 8 on Triple Play Radio, 105.5, I believe. And then the only other announcement that I finally get to make this announcement, I've been waiting all season to make this announcement. The Pioneer ninth graders won their game today, 50-8.
Way to go, Pioneers.
So
Way to go, Pioneers.
just finished the game. So anyway, congratulations, ninth grade Pioneers. All right, anything for upcoming meetings? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn.
Also, Counselor Weaver's not here.
Oh, Counselor Weaver is not here this evening. Would you vote, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And that is approved 4-0. We are adjourned. I forgot. Yeah.